52% of the Fortune 500 from 20 years ago does not exist today. 52% of today's Fortune 500, the brands we love, are not going to be here in 20 years.
Yep.
Today's trends are going to create huge issues, and we don't know who the winners are going to be. But I'll say that today's most valuable company, NVIDIA, is the trigger of the next 20 years of our industry.
Microsoft's purpose is in service of your purpose.
And again, 2024 is the year that partners come out as the leading edge of the spear on finding this buyer intent.
You show up to every meeting and demonstrate why you are relevant.
Every day I have to force myself to make sure that I'm taking one step ahead in terms of my own learning.
That flywheel of success is where you will build momentum, and that momentum will continue, and then you feed into the other systems to say, this is what we did, this is how we did it together.
Welcome to, or welcome back to the Ultimate Guide to Partnering. I'm Vince Menzione, your host, and my mission is to help leaders like you achieve your greatest results through successful partnering. Today I have a special treat for you. In the studio for our 2025 kickoff is Jay McBain, the principal analyst at Canalys, a longtime friend and leader in this ecosystem movement. Jay coined the term decade of the ecosystem over 5 years ago, and now we're kicking off 2025 for the second half of the decade of the ecosystem. Jay, welcome back to Boca.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, we are back in the studio again, same location, a different day and time. So you were the first guest in this studio back in Feb. I think we launched on March 4th, I want to say was the date of last year. Why every CEO needs to be a chief partner officer. I think was the name of the episode. It was a conversation based on a keynote that you had given just a little bit earlier in the year. So I'm excited to welcome you back. We're kicking off 2025. And so I couldn't think of a better guest to have us kick off the second half of the decade of the ecosystem since you coined that term and take us through it. So, but for our listeners and viewers that may not know you, maybe just a moment about Canalys, your role there as a chief analyst. And also there's been a lot going on at Canalys. So I was hoping maybe you could bring us up to speed on what's happened since last year.
Yeah, first of all, Canalys is a research and analyst firm.
Yep.
It goes back 25 years.
Wow.
And Canalys is Latin for channel.
Yep.
So while bigger firms tend to kind of be broad-based in terms of what they do, they mostly call on product folks because they serve the CIO. This company was broken out because all we focus on is channels, partnerships, alliances, ecosystems. So for me, it was a home made in heaven, as spending 30 years doing this. And waking up with, over 100 people every day that in different countries of the world, that's all they think about.
Yeah.
It's a great environment to be in. We got acquired last year by Informa. Just last week, we became a NASDAQ company when we acquired TechTarget.
Fantastic.
So lots underway here that we can talk about in terms of second-party data instead of third-party data. As analysts, we're one of the little parts of the 28 moments that a customer uses before they make a decision. Yeah. And our data is just as valuable nowadays as our analysis.
I love it. And you've been a guest. I don't know if this is episode 7 or 8, but we have talked about the robe. We owe you the robe. You and Tony Savoyan both get the robe, by the way.
Yeah. And I think this is the Saturday Night Live 5-timer robe that we're talking about here. So
yeah, so I'd love to dive into this moment. Right, we've crossed a line into the second half of the decade of the ecosystem. And tell us, maybe for those who don't know, why did you coin this the decade of the ecosystem?
Yeah, it dates back to 1999. And we got into this decade of sales. Yep. And there was a small company in San Francisco that got launched called Salesforce.com.
Never heard of them.
And they were rethinking CRM differently than maybe Siebel and other people have thought about it before then.
Yep.
And it was obviously an as-a-service type of offering and subscription-based and really different. And I was at IBM at the time, and, we'd just spent $1 billion on Siebel for a global rollout, and I was in sales. I was one of the first people who bought Salesforce on my credit card. Remember Shadow IT?
I do.
But you'd go into the decade of 1999, thinking that you are born to be a salesperson. You manage your territory with your gut. Those were the things that made successful people. As you exited that decade, 2009, you were very much a scientist. your pipeline to the 7th decimal point. Everything was a sales process and operational, and all of the different strategies we used were all technology-based. And now there's 5,000 sales tech tools that sit on top of Salesforce. So we entered in 2009, the decade of marketing.
Yes.
And I remember then, going to cocktail parties and having CMOs tell me that, Jay, 50% of my marketing dollars are wasted. I just don't know which 50%. And that was really funny back then at cocktail parties. It got less funny as midway through that decade, you had 58-year-old CMOs starting to be replaced by 38-year-old growth hackers.
Yeah.
And these are people that came to the party with a platform. They came in with Marketo or Eloqua or HubSpot or Pardot, with Acton. But there's 14,106 ISVs in the MarTech stack today, and they build their 7-layer stack. And again, growth hackers started to take over marketing.
Yes.
And in many companies, in many mid-sized companies, still to this day, the CMO spends more money on technology than the CIO. So that was the decade of marketing. The one thing that you and I know was missing from that was partnering.
Yes.
73% of our industry goes to, through, and with partners. We know today 96% of it's partner assisted. We know today there's 28 moments before a customer makes a decision. 24 of those moments in the best case scenario are run by partners. In the normal case scenario, probably all 28 of those moments are owned by others. So in this post-cookie world, we're kind of looking at this thing 5 years ago and saying, as marketing and sales was changed forever into a science, we were still running around the Caribbean, drinking with our partners, and we were misunderstood in our own organizations.
Absolutely.
We were those people over there that, no one understood, and we had no responsibilities, and we had all this budget and things like that, and a lot of envy and everything else. But, as we started this decade, is we got to move this into science. I think we spent the first 5 years of the decade of the ecosystem shouting from the mountaintops, and you were probably one of the people right on the top of the mountain.
Yep.
And the truth sayer and the, one that can define what an ultimate partner is and do that, in front of tens of millions of people. We're at the point now, and I think a couple months ago, Salesforce again delivered us the goods. They brought out their state of sales, which they do every year.
Yes.
They talked to 5,500 VPs and CROs. These are people who 2 years ago who couldn't spell channel. They brought out their big report that said 89% of the world's salespeople now use partners every day. For the 11% who don't, 58% plan to within the next year. You magically put those two numbers together, you get to the 96% partner assist. That's what, for example, Microsoft measures in every deal. Yeah. 96% of them have, 7 partners surrounding them. So here we are, mid-decade, and I think all the salespeople, the last thing in that report, by the way, which is astounding, is over half the salespeople in 2024 in every industry didn't make their numbers.
Yeah.
Very tough environment for a whole, for a whole host of reasons at the end buyer. But the fact of the matter, for those who did make their numbers, the minority, 84% of them pointed at partners as the reason why they made their numbers.
I love it.
So here we are. We have the receipts. We have this point, but we're still not a science.
We're not at
the 7th decimal point. We're not measuring these 28 moments or any other of the moments effectively enough. And we're not equipped to talk to the board, to talk to our C-suite, to talk to investors, to talk in public about the true quantifiable ultimate partner.
Why do you think that's so?
Well, I think we spent the first 5 years getting noticed.
Okay.
And that was important. Again, shouting from the mountaintops when you're misunderstood or not noticed, you're not part of the C-suite, you're kind of over there. It was our moment to shine. We had the data, at least, to show that partner deals were bigger, they closed faster, the percentage of them were bigger. This is why 89% of salespeople are using partners. But we had the data finally to show. But now we got to turn, as the decade of sales and the decade of marketing has taught us, that if we don't walk out of this decade 5 years from now, talking at the 7th decimal point, regaling at those times in the Caribbean we used to drink with our partners, talking multiplier language, talking platforms, operationalizing everything, then I think we would have failed.
Yeah. And as you know, we've been talking about the tectonic shifts, right? Mm-hmm. And a component And I asked the question because I think one of the components that, you talk about the channel chief hanging out the bar till 3:00 in the morning back in the old days when it was a push. But now we've seen this embracing of the hyperscalers in a big way, right? We talked about Cisco. You'll talk more about Cisco, I'm sure. But the fact that they are now embracing marketplaces, which means they're embracing co-selling with hyperscalers. And we had Cisco up on stage at our last event, right, with Microsoft, hand in hand, not talking about channels, but talking about ecosystem, which is what this is all about, right? It's a different point of view when it's at the customer level, which I think is your point of view as well, that it's really the customer making the decision surrounded by the 7 seats at the table, as you described.
Yeah, I mean, we've always looked at channel of distribution, which it's short for, as this linear supply chain thing.
Yep. Where
a vendor sells to a partner sells to a customer. Everything was focused on that point of sale. And we spent 43 years doing that in that way. And that's all the way the money flowed as well.
Yes.
And this recognition that partners have that, hey, we do a lot more than just be a cash register for you.
That's right.
Do you think your customer just got to the table and wanted to buy Cisco? Well, no. There's probably moments that, there was co-marketing moments, maybe co-selling moments.
Yep.
Could have been co-innovation or co-development moments. There could have been, co-keep moments now that 54% of Cisco is recurring.
That's right.
So there's a lot of moments that go outside of resell. And we just ran a survey, because this is another monumental tectonic shift in this decade, that now the number one ask of partners of their vendors is to start measuring and incentivizing us outside of the point of sale.
Yes.
And this took a long time because it was always, we need more leads, we need better education, we need more training, all the systematic stuff. I need a better channel account manager. Well, number one, by orders of magnitude now, is just recognize me, measure me, monitor me, manage me, whatever it takes to show that from that very first moment at the customer to every renewal, every 30 days forever, I'm there.
Yes.
And the reason you lowered your cost to acquire the customer, the reason you have a customer for life is because every 30 days, I'm there. I'm implementing, I'm integrating, I'm doing the managed services. So understand that until you can start measuring those things up against your own company goals, that, you're going to have a broken program. And that's where we all take away this operational part of it,
yep,
which is more difficult.
And that measurement is different, right? So now we're talking about point systems, right? We've talked, Microsoft was the first to the table at this,
yep,
right? The first major, yeah. The first major, you chronicled this.
Yep.
This was back in the days, actually when Rodney Clark was still running the organization, the partner organization. Ironically, he went over to Cisco as their new channel chief, and what's happened at Cisco?
Yeah, so I mean, if you dial back, it was actually Gabriella Schuster was in the job during the build, spent a lot of time in Redmond during these years, during the build of this system. I mean, if you ask partners around the world, whether it's 500,000 VARs, now over 300,000 MSPs, millions of all kinds of partners, Microsoft is held up as the gold standard.
Yeah.
Back to August 12, 1981, it is the gold standard for
here in Boca Raton.
Here in Boca Raton. That's a side story that'd take another hour.
Yes.
The Bill Gates coming in as a scruffy teenager.
Probably not clean shaven and probably didn't take a shower on
And one meeting in Boca Raton created the richest person in the world.
Yes.
For over a decade, actually 15 years. But suffice it to say, they're the gold standard of programs. For them to step away from gold, silver, bronze was more than shocking. There's still 106 channel magazines around the world that run cover stories about it. Rodney wasn't in the job that long because he was on a global apology tour.
Yes.
And he was apologizing to the core VARs that joined Microsoft in the 80s and 90s as margins were coming down during the cloud era, as, Office 365 and then Microsoft 365, went down to $6 or $9 per person and you made 6 cents. Nobody was paying their mortgages on any type of these margins.
That's right.
So Microsoft made the smart choice of responding to partners and saying, we understand that there's 7 of you and 6 or more of you are not collecting money.
That's right.
But we understand you might be co-marketing, you might be consulting, you might be designing, architecting deals. And even at the point of sale, you could be configuring, pricing, quoting, procuring, provisioning, delivering. You could be doing so many other things than just physically collecting money.
Yeah.
So in that sense, wouldn't it be great to set up a system where we recognize and measure these other things, non-transactional moments, and just try to quantify back to how important it is for Microsoft. I will say since then, though, like looking in the rearview mirror, Microsoft has outsold their main competitor, AWS, for 26 straight quarters.
Interesting.
And they made a pitch, and this is an important nuance to this. They made a pitch to kind of Wall Street to say, we think, as you've looked at SaaS companies and recurring revenue, we think that's probably more valuable than maybe a company that has to bring out a cell phone in September and sell a lot of them by December. We think that this boring utility type of revenue that we are going to retain at 108%, meaning if we lose any deals in customers, 8%. We're going to double everybody else.
Yep.
So the math was this. It says, when this point system came out and they had these tens of billions of dollars that used to be front and back end margins, so they had these gross to nets to play with, they lifted 2/3 of all the dollars and put them post-sale.
Yes.
Shocking to almost everyone, because if you're going after a bigger competitor that had an early head start and has a commanding share, you think you'd be running more Super Bowl ads and more marketing. Well, no, they were already outgrowing them. So let's go and retain it at 108.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years later, the market responded by making Microsoft the most valuable company in the world.
So the second half of the decade, what have you seen in the first half that you didn't expect to see?
The first thing was, which I kind of got wrong, was the word ecosystem. It's not a good word.
Why so?
Partially because, there's ecosystems in the Brazilian rainforest.
Yes.
There's scientists that have studied ecosystems forever. The business ecosystem, word has been around. But since we coined it, like this decade of the ecosystem, there's actually 900,000 people on LinkedIn who have added it to their title, their main title. I'm the head of, channel ecosystem.
And many of them are experts now in this.
They are, which is great because they follow this podcast and they follow your work and they come to your events. But what's interesting is there's 800,000 or 900,000 other people that use ecosystems as, kind of what they do.
Right.
In the first sentence of what they do. The fact of the matter, though, is the word has been replaced, and rightfully so, with platform.
Platform, yes.
Platform is something that Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch in Wall Street understand a bit better than ecosystem. Ecosystems are really complicated, and they're nebulous, almost as nebulous as the cloud was.
And they're loosely coupled.
Hard to measure.
Yes.
So platform was something that was better understood because there are platforms in every industry. When you go to automotive and pharmaceuticals and manufacturing and banking and insurance, people kind of understand powerful and it's more celestial at that point.
Yes.
There's degrees of gravity where you attract services partnerships and you have a multiplier that attaches, for Microsoft, $8.45 or AWS, $6.40. There's a multiplier that attaches with you, and that's what attracts millions of people to be part of your ecosystem. But there's also technology integrations. There's 250,000 SaaS companies. There's 1 million emerging tech companies, IoT and quantum computing and metaverse and everywhere else. But there's all these companies that are attracted to you because the new buyer is buying 7-layer stacks.
Yes.
And integrations are their first criteria if you're a millennial buyer, who's now the majority in our industry. So in this world, you're attracting services, you're attracting the alliances, the technology integrations you need. You're running this marketplace, which brings together the credits, brings together the ability to manage the 7 partners and the 7 integration.
This new TAM as well.
And this, 14 different elements of this new TAM.
That's right.
And so the orchestration of this gravity is what defines a platform on these 3 levels. And while everybody calls themselves a platform, we truly know, and, Wall Street's getting very good at deciding who is a true platform or not. And platform is synonymous with partnering. It was a better word than ecosystems. It's a better word than alliances, channels, partnerships. Platforms is what we were waiting for. And now we just need to plumb underneath what makes a successful platform.
So we're not going to change or recoin the decade, are we?
The decade is here. And, one of the pivotal tectonic shifts is now the ecosystem is better defined, better measured, better orchestrated, and now better quantified, better valued by those, that are richer and smarter than us.
Yeah. around these platforms. If you look at it, the platforms are surrounding the ecosystem, if you will.
Yeah, and by the way, you're not always layer 1 of a 7-layer stack.
That's right.
You could be layer 7. I grew up in the early days of IBM where you couldn't get fired for buying IBM.
Yep.
Nowadays, a customer's going to go and buy 7 different things, and be integration first. I'll buy a product 80% as good as the other if it works better in my environment. So this is a different buying scenario, but you might be competing for, if you lose layer 1 and they're not buying from your marketplace, you still might be competing for layer 3, 5, and 7. So you might be doing the cybersecurity, you might be doing backup or data work, you might be doing generative AI work. Up the stack, you might be doing a lot of different things, but you don't own the deal. You're not getting the $1 million baseline of the deal. You're getting 10,000 here, 100,000 here, but it's still great business. So on one side, you are the platform. You have the direct relationship with the customer, you orchestrate all these things. But in the next deal, you're up in Chicago with Microsoft, you're in Las Vegas with AWS, you're at San Francisco with Dreamforce.
Yep.
You're part of another, set of ecosystems.
And you could be bringing multiple platforms together, right?
That's exactly what
you're bringing Snowflake with Microsoft or AWS or Google, or whoever the other partners are. And
then securing that with CrowdStrike.
That's right.
And then bringing in NVIDIA to do the processing, bringing in, all the layers.
So let's talk about 2025. We're here now. I can't believe that this last half of the decade went so fast.
Mm-hmm.
What's on the crystal ball? What do you see?
Well, the numbers speak volumes. The world economy is probably going to grow about 2.6% next year, GDP-wise.
Yeah.
It's at $105 trillion right now. The tech industry is going to grow by 8.2%. So more than triple what the world economy. It will, again, for the 10th year running, be the number 1 fastest growing industry, attracting even more professional services folks and people interested in these multipliers. But inside that 8.2% growth, we keep asking partners, what are they going to focus on? No one wants to grow at 8%.
No.
Everyone wants to grow at double digits. And there's, certain partners out there looking at triple digit growth next year. So what they want to anchor on is those parts of the market, the buyer, the industry, the geographies, the segments, the product sets that are going to grow by significantly more than 8. So the trifecta that's being built in kind of what we'll call that core channel that's been around 40 years is cybersecurity continues to grow by double digits. While it grows by close to 10%, cyber services grow at 13%. And managed security services grows at 15%.
Makes sense.
So again, you're growing 1.5 times faster than the vendor. So in the services market, next year will be about a $5.4 trillion industry globally in all of tech and telco. Hardware makes up $1 trillion. Software makes up $1 trillion. Services make up $3 trillion. So in that scenario, services are outgrowing products. Partners are outgrowing their vendors.
Very interesting.
And what they're trying to do is hook their caboose to the vendors that, are growing the fastest in the places.
Where do you see the most growth for services? Is it MSPs? Is it managed service providers?
Yeah, so cyber was one example. Managed services has been this incredible story, tectonic shift.
Yes.
So next year, managed services out of that $5 trillion will be $610 billion. So just to put that in perspective, for all the talk about SaaS, Salesforce, ServiceNow, Workday, HubSpot, 250,000 wonderful SaaS companies, managed services is 1.5 times larger than SaaS industry.
Fascinating.
If all the love we give to Microsoft and AWS and Google, and then down the line, Alibaba, Oracle, IBM, all the hyperscalers in the world, if you add them all together, managed services will be 1.5 times larger. So talk about something that's now 15 cents out of every dollar that every IT budget has is on a managed contract. 82% of end customers are doing it. 337,000 partners are now engaged in managed services. It's a thing, and it's growing by 12%.
Yeah.
Talk about growing a $600 billion number at 12%. There's $70 billion of new logos ready to be signed.
And this started off with Bob in your local town wanting to manage your PCs, right? And really has grown into organizations that are over $1 billion or more now, these MSP organizations.
Yeah, it started actually, and I got to work at Autotask in the early days. I remember right around the time Salesforce started was the same time Autotask started, and ConnectWise was already there. and had to start building a cloud SaaS solution. But these are early days where you're fighting over 100 partners at a Holiday Inn in Wichita, and very immature in terms of the tool set and how this would be repeatable and scalable and things like that. But boy, 25 years later, managed services is one of the darlings of the market. And again, trusted by almost every buyer, from the smallest flower shop to the biggest bank or government.
Because you wouldn't use them if you didn't trust.
Well, that's it. It's all trust, because you're handing over your keys. They have your passwords. They have the internal access. Talk about zero trust. They are 0.0.
Yeah.
They have access to everything. And if you didn't trust them, you wouldn't hand over the keys.
What are you seeing from the hyperscalers' point of view? Right, we've had a pretty big year for all three of them, and AI continues to dominate the conversations. What do you see as the trends going into 2025?
Yeah, they keep posting 20 to 30% growth, depending on the ones. The consumption of AI, will continue as utility companies, to continue this growth. And these are really big numbers now. AWS passed 100 billion, and to run that, grow that kind of business between 20 and 30% is unprecedented, kind of in the history of business and capitalism. But they keep doing it. And Microsoft is growing in the 30s. Google's growing in the 30s. The opportunity, and if you frame this opportunity up, we talked about Bill Gates, becoming a billionaire here in Boca, but the client server era ran about 20 years. Through the 80s, through the 90s. I talked about 99, kind of the start of that SaaS. But SaaS then 10 years later into hyperscalers. Cloud kind of ran 20 years. Our industry over 40 years is broken up kind of into those two 20-year segments. Before that was IBM mainframes and DEC and HP.
Yeah, I think it was those that AWS launched their platform.
Yeah. And by the way, the RISC processor was here in Boca as well, handed out by IBM to a competitor.
That's right.
Along with storage and other things. So there's 8 stories here in Boca that shut down IBM here. Big Blues is the book that I would suggest reading or listening to.
We're going to have to get that book.
It's 8 chapters, 8 decisions. The CEO at the time, because in the 70s, 80s, IBM was the number one stock in the world to own.
Yeah.
It was being broken up by the government as AT&T, kind of antitrust. It's too big, it's too strong. But, after that 1981 PC announcement, the Bill Gates meeting here in Boca, it was less than 12 years later that IBM didn't make payroll. So they went from getting broken up as antitrust to not making payroll in 12 years.
That's fascinating.
So that was the client server era, and as disruptive as it was. If you look at the valuations of companies today, you obviously, right starting at the very top and working your way down, you can see how disruptive the cloud era was. 52% of the Fortune 500 from 20 years ago does not exist today. 52% of today's Fortune 500, the brands we love, are not going to be here in 20 years.
Yep.
Today's trends are going to create huge issues, and we don't know who the winners are going to be. But I'll say that today's most valuable company, NVIDIA, is the trigger of the next 20 years of our industry. And going into next year, we're only at year 2 of what was the consumer trend of AI.
Yeah.
And some of the early winners have been chosen, like OpenAI and NVIDIA, and obviously the hyperscalers are taking the compute. But 83% of the world's business data sits on premises.
Yes.
It sits on old IBM mainframes. It sits on old DEC, EMC, storage racks. Your relationship with your bank and your relationship with your airline and your government is going to change radically. Not next year, but in 10 years. Over the course of this decade, that data at the edge is going to have to be trained and tuned, indexed and inferred into these models. And the work is mostly going to be done at the edge.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that because I don't see a lot of this data going into a public cloud.
It's not. And the 3 public cloud CEOs have said that to their partners. That says, we don't have enough electricity. We're not getting to nuclear fast enough. We don't have enough fresh water. People in Latin America are already protesting that the data center gets more fresh water and their family can't drink.
It's crazy.
So we're in that mode now that can we forklift 83% of the world's business data into public centers? The answer is absolutely not.
Yep.
So these new data lakes are going to be created at the edge. Everything that happens hybrid, colo or hybrid, virtualized, or at the edge is all benefits partner channels.
Yes.
This is where they do their best work. And so, or they do their legacy work. And so the more that happens at the edge is going to drive more democracy around, the trillions of dollars that get created, and the first trillionaire will be created, in this decade. It'll probably be Elon Musk.
I was going to say it's going to be Elon.
It's going to be Elon Musk, and he happens to be in government for the next 4 years.
Yes, he does.
Each of his businesses will benefit from that. But suffice it to say, here we are. We're in kind of the first out of the we overestimate what's going to happen in 2 years and underestimate 10. That's Bill Gates from 1996.
Yes.
It's happened here. Everybody's a little bit disillusioned in the first couple of years. The GSIs didn't put the earnings on the straight that everybody thought. Early adopters aren't here in big numbers. But we're only at we've moved from consumer to productivity, where every SaaS company now has new features in their product. Our cars, our toothbrushes have new features. But again, the promise of AI is not efficiency, effectiveness. It's the relationship change that we have in our daily lives. When my co-pilot goes to lunch with your co-pilot, we know that that's disruption. When we don't have to get out of bed in the morning, that's disruption. So that's a 10-year, and we're underestimating what's going to happen this decade.
Probably right. Let's talk about the election a little bit here in terms of what the outcome will be going into. You mentioned Elon Musk and the new administration taking hold in a couple of days now. How do you layer that into the economy and the forces you'll see in 2025? What are your predictions coming out of you and Canalys there?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is you and I live in southern Florida within miles of Palm Beach Airport.
Yep.
So now we have trackers that we can get to see who flies in. So, when Trump threatens Canada with a tariff on a Thursday, the Prime Minister of Canada on a Friday
is here,
kissing the ring. When, there's somebody put in charge of the SEC or FTC that, is shocking. Mark Zuckerberg here is the next day. Watching the private jets land at Palm Beach right now is just an exercise.
It's disrupting our travel. I have to spend an extra half hour getting to the airport.
That's right. All these black SUVs are everywhere.
Exactly.
The kissing the ring process. But suffice it to say, this is not just a United States. This is a global podcast. This is a global story.
It is.
45% of all humans went to the polls this year. Half the world. And in 90% of cases, the incumbents lost.
They lost.
So the world has shifted right. The world has shifted into change.
Yes.
There's no more change here in the United States that's causing ripples. I was in Bali, Indonesia last week, and pretty much the lead story was, the China-U.S. relations over the next 4 years. Obviously, there was martial law declared in South Korea.
That was wild.
Taiwan, which ships 99% of everything that we've talked about.
Yes.
India with tariffs. So the ripples that are happening outside of the U.S. from this election here are just a moment of chaos. And we have somebody in power that doesn't need to run again or can't run again.
That's right.
And doesn't have to, play by any specific rules, not that he ever has. And has partnered himself with now 44 people that he's put into, senior positions that are made for TV. So every day we're going to feel a little bit like Captain Picard and ask for a damage report. So this is what the electorate wanted.
Yes.
And individually, everybody's different, but we all celebrate the fact that we live in a democracy. And if 50.1% of people wanted change, we've got it.
We've got it.
And we've got it in orders of magnitude. And the implications of our industry are almost at the tip of the spear. The one thing that holds true, though, is that the U.S. cannot slip behind in AI. Most of the computer history over 43 years has been a very U.S.-centric companies.
Yeah.
And where chips are built, where the IP is set, and how the battles are going to take shape is going to really drive the next 20 years of this industry. But suffice it to say, at a technology level, the U.S. has to win more so than any other industry.
Yeah.
And for national security and for reasons that aren't technology, the investments that are going to be made and what's defined as making America great, but how much of that's going to happen within these borders is going to be a reset from where we've been for, probably 200 years.
So I would say less regulation with the Trump administration, wouldn't you? And that also means, greater growth in the areas of technology.
Correct. You can go back to Reagan.
Right.
You can go back to, business growth getting fueled. And whether it's just the regulation, legislation, governance, or just a feeling of being unbound.
Yeah.
business owners, and, our industry is full of millions of entrepreneurs, becoming the ultimate partners. And, if they feel unbound, this raises GDP. This raises the tech industry perhaps to double digits next year. Maybe we're on the low end of the prediction.
Could be.
And again, the tech industry in 2008 and 2001 took the world out of recession. The sentiment and optimism of partners in those two periods is what took the tech industry to do that. And the same thing's going to happen in 2025. We're seeing all the same metrics.
I love the optimism. What about tariffs? How do you think tariffs will layer into our, your organization chronicles the PC industry.
Yep.
And a lot of that comes out of Taiwan, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of the chips and the builds around there.
Well, that's part of the damage report.
Yeah.
When you start putting tariffs on everything that isn't American made, then you start learning how much isn't American made.
Right.
Including the vehicle you drive that might be made by an American manufacturer.
Yeah. Or assembled by an American manufacturer.
Or assembled in this case. So, when we're actively buying on Amazon, Walmart, and, how we do everything and how we assemble all the plastic in our lives, you'll learn pretty quickly at tariffs how that works. It's a big gamble, and, there's 50% of people who don't believe, and some of the most esteemed economists don't believe tariffs are the right way to go.
Right.
But these people have been proven wrong before. And there's, a bunch of people that wanted change and wanted, the world to become less global for maybe a few decades. Maybe it went too far. And remember, Reaganomics was globalization.
Yes, it was.
This wasn't a right versus left conversation. But, Bill Clinton carried on those policies.
Yep.
George W. carried on. Barack Obama carried on.
Yep.
And it was Trump in his first term that actually broke up some of those things and renegotiated them. But again, all hands are off now. He's got the Senate, he's got the Congress, he's got the Supreme Court, he's got all the checks and balances in his favor. So it's all bets are off.
So what else should we prepare for? How are we thinking through 2025? How are you consulting with your organizations that you work with at Canalys?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, you've got a new buyer, starting January 1st as your majority. Second, you've got a platform economy that you need to play in, or you're going to be one of those 52% of logos that drop off the Fortune 500 in the next couple of decades. You've got a different economics of partnering, and now your partners are demanding and screaming for it as the number one thing they want. So, if you think your gold, silver, bronze is going to survive to 2025, you're probably mistaken.
The days of silver and gold are gone.
But if you think that, your career might have plateaued as well.
Yes.
It's the most aggressive people right now listening to what partners want and getting that partner from making 10 or 20% of the deal to 200 to 300% of the deal, getting them on stage to win the partner of the year. Those are the people that are getting promoted today and finding, good employment in partner professional, type of career paths. So that's happening. All the while we're going through the end of the cookie. All the while we're going through this generative AI where every one of our roles is changing. Are the co-pilots that sit on our, shoulders today that start to consume every email and listen to every podcast and go and attend every event and see through our eyes. They just get smarter and smarter and smarter. So if you're not open to being augmented, in terms of your job role, you're probably going to be passed by as well. So all of us from our careers have some major tectonic shifts, some inflection points that the good news is I think we see all the trains are on the tracks. I don't think we're going to get surprised by something that we don't see as a trend today happening in 2025. But we all have to predict where these trains are picking up speed, where they're going to end up, not just at the end of 2025, but take a 3 to 5 year view. And when things are growing at what they're growing, this is exponential growth. It's not linear, harder to see when that happens. But I think it's a career reflection point for the tens of millions of us that call the channel home.
Yeah. And we talk about the hyperscalers, probably the outsized role of the hyperscalers today, right? We're trying NVIDIA chips and data centers. Microsoft alone is spending $16 billion a quarter, and that's growing. And if you multiply the other two in there, it's a significant investment.
Yep.
The barriers to entry are getting bigger and bigger.
One of those things, though, from those numbers is we haven't talked about is sustainability. And most of the people, half the world that went to polls this year ended up electing to not talk about sustainability over the next 4 years.
That's right.
But I'll tell you that if you take the same question and ask Google in a Google search or ask ChatGPT, ChatGPT takes 866% more electricity and fresh water.
Wow.
For a simple query.
Yeah.
866% more. So for the companies like Microsoft who had made key climate pledges by 2030 and 2040 and 2050, they've silently kind of walked away from them. Many people that were on their DE&I, kind of paths and, in charge of sustainability have been part of recent layoffs. The world shifting right has also shifted some of these major concerns as well, allowing companies, again, less regulation, but also less focus on maybe the things that we should be focused on the most.
And are we going to pivot more towards nuclear power? We're seeing that already, right?
All the hyperscalers have nuclear deals. Actually, Google was just told no a few weeks ago on one of the deals, but
3 Mile Island is in play now with Microsoft.
When you're looking at the level of compute, the level of storage, the level of networking that's going to propel something that's growing exponentially, there's no other way. There is no electricity, there is no fresh water.
Certainly no solar
that scales at this level.
Yeah.
And until, people in Western countries find that their tap runs dry and watch the data center out the window sucking in all the, there's some major innovation that's going to happen to solve for some of these things. But, nuclear's not been a cool topic, for so many reasons over the last, 20 or 30 years. But it's becoming cool again because it is sustainable. And
it's safer now than it was when these
safer now than it is
70s and 80s. These were old designs that are obsolete by today's standards. Let's talk more about the hyperscalers, if you don't mind. I want to dig in on marketplaces for a second, right? This is a favorite topic. You've done some predictions here. I think we're running at about a $20 billion run rate currently on marketplaces. Would you agree? Higher? What's the number that we're currently?
On 2025, we're going to hit 45
billion.
Yeah. And that's pure. That doesn't include any SaaS marketplaces, doesn't include distribution marketplaces.
And that's not just the big three, that's overall.
That's overall, but 90% of it's the big three.
Right.
And the overwhelming leader is AWS in these numbers. But suffice it to say, probably the most accurate prediction Canalys has made in 25 years was made 5 years ago. As we start to see marketplaces and subscription consumption economies and younger buyers, we said they would grow at 86% compounded, and that would equal 45 billion, and that's exactly where we are.
We're right on track then for the 40.
So we had to go and rewrite that kind of projection for the next 5 years. It's still at a 40% compounded, and some strange things happen. That gets us to 85, by 2028, I believe, $1 billion. We predicted AWS would be a top 10 distributor.
Yes.
Joining the likes of TD SYNNEX and Ingram and Arrow, and that's some of our beloved distributors, and it happened. So now we're looking at how long is it going to take them to be a top 5? And, it's not going to take years. That might happen, 2025 by the end or 2026. They automatically grow up. We talked to a cybersecurity company today that is at $2 billion on AWS. They were not one of the ones that wrote a press release about it.
Wow.
So we know that CrowdStrike and Palo Alto and Splunk and Snowflake are all writing press releases bragging about the billions of dollars. AWS...
There were 5 last year. They got
4, yeah.
Yeah, 4 that wrote press releases and a 5th that I know did not write a press release.
And we're now finding several more that are at that rate that their lawyers just don't allow them to write press releases.
Yeah.
And then AWS has kind of told us as well last week in Vegas that there are multiple companies that are over 2 now. So when you just add this all together, to become a top 10 distributor, you have to do $5 billion. That's about the level that D&H is. It was a level that Exclusive was before they acquired NextGen. They're bigger now. But, that's, gets you to that type of size. And now when you have multiple companies, 5, 6, 7, 8 companies having billion-dollar run rates, that surpasses 5 pretty fast. And so what ends up happening is, the big distributors, TD SYNNEX and Ingram, are $60 and $50 billion in size. They're twice the size of McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Nike, Starbucks. Astounding how big they are by revenue, not by value. They're valued at 10 cents to the dollar. Ingram just went public at $50 billion, and it's worth $5 on the stock market.
Yep.
So, and that's what the pass-through is. General accounting rules would say that they report as a $5 billion company because they only get to recognize the pass-through revenue, the profit, not the, because that other revenue is Cisco and Dell and HP and Lenovo and others. That being said, how you get into the top 5, isn't, the type of, growth to hit those kind of numbers. But it'll happen very, very shortly. So, marketplaces, the other kind of more shocking projection we made was today, we talked last time, that 30% of all marketplace deals are basically partners clicking buy on behalf of the customer.
That's right.
They're very partner friendly with private offers, multi-partner offers, distributors, sellers of records, and all kinds of innovation in including partners in marketplaces. Well, we projected by 2027, 50% of deals will have partner funding built in. The company that hit $2 billion that I talked about this morning, one of the top 10 cybersecurity companies in the world, they're at 73% already.
By funding, what do you mean?
Partner private offers, multi-partner offers, but there's not only a recognition that 96% of the deals a partner will be there, but it's going to trip over 50% of them are actually going to be funded. The gross to nets that may have gone into the old days of front and back end margins, market development funds and spiffs and new customer bonuses are going to show up in marketplaces as, new kind of funding, co-innovation funding, co-development funding, market development funds, all these kind of things are going to show up
in the market
in just a different, it's not going to be linear two-tier distribution, but marketplaces are going to be this great orchestrator that as a partner doing 3.2 things, looking for co-innovation, looking for co-marketing and co-selling, looking for co-keeping strategies, it's going to be funded that way.
I love it. What other trends are you seeing? What any predictions per se for this year? Do you have any one table stakes?
Well, we just made 8 predictions in Bali last week, and we try to be shocking. The CEO of Canalys and has stepped away since we got acquired, but he made a prediction that Trump and Musk would not be friends by the end of 2025.
That is an interesting one to watch.
So not only did the 44 people that reported to Trump in the first term, 40 of them wrote books, equating him to very evil people.
Yes.
And, there's lots of stories around that, but 40 out of 44 is a pretty big number.
It's a big number.
You could probably predict, and it'll probably be an accurate prediction, that 40 out of the 44 that were just hired are probably going to walk away
at some point,
not happy with how things turned out. But to say Elon Musk, who could benefit the most, from this presidency, within a year has a run-in and walks away. That was one of the predictions. I made a prediction that, Intel would cease to exist. I did that in Miami here. And then a few weeks later, the CEO was fired. And now there's talk about breaking up the foundry. You can't really, as a chip manufacturer, manufacture competitors' chips. This isn't partnering, because everywhere in our industry, it's co-opetition. Microsoft partners with every one of their competitors. They're partnered with AWS.
Yes.
They're partnered with everyone. The fact of the matter is, in those partnerships, the competitor, in this case, doesn't have to share their roadmap, their projections, their volumes. When you're in chip manufacturing, can you imagine walking into your competitor and saying, here's our technology that we're introducing in the next 2 years. Here's how many we're going to sell exactly by day. That's a level of information you can't run a foundry if you also compete.
Yeah.
So that's why TSMC and that's why these, other foundry businesses don't have a chip. They're not NVIDIA, they're not AMD, and it won't be Intel. I think that Pat lost this battle.
Yeah.
He was connected to Andy Grove. He's one of the last links to the original Intel from 50 years ago. I think the epic battle of
great leader, by the way.
Wonderful. Drove VMware and others to great heights. But he was the legacy of that company. And the ultimate fight with the board was probably over that. Is can you run, a chip business and a manufacturing business in the same company?
No.
And try to convince people that there's some sort of solid wall between them. And he probably in the end lost the battle. And again, not going to go and run, a split up of what originally Andy Grove and the original founders had thought. And it's kind of sad, but it's going to cease to exist.
Yeah, they missed the mark. They missed the time.
And one of the foundry business is going to be bought by somebody. And we probably know the acronym of the company that's going to buy it.
Yes.
But the Intel chip itself, whether it's Qualcomm or something else, is in a dangerous situation financially of getting acquired as well.
Yeah.
So this is a legendary client server company, missing mobility, missing crypto, which ran on GPUs, and then missing Gen AI, which ran on the same GPUs. So missing two major cranks in the industry, not only missing cloud, but then in mobility, but missing generative AI. These are the 52% of companies that go away. You can't miss, and you can't miss as bad. Microsoft has missed and been late.
Yeah.
But they always
mobility.
They hit the gravel,
Yeah.
They wiggle, they get back on the road and start accelerating. And the reason they do is the culture of partnering.
That's right.
It's like we made a mistake. We missed this 5 years ago. It's on us. We missed mobility. They missed the internet, by years.
Yeah.
So missing several things, but we're going to get back on the road with our partners and the trust we built over 40 plus years. We're going to start accelerating again. And when we do, we're going to spin off more money than anyone else.
They're doing it.
And over time, you can trust that in our souls, in our hearts, that we're a partner first company.
And they had the diversity of portfolio as well, right? I mean, they had cloud.
Yeah.
They had Satya in leading cloud. They bring him in as CEO and Bing.
And making that call that, that was Windows is great and Office is great and Dynamics is great and all these other, cool things. Surfaces are great computers and all these things are cool. But making that bet on the cloud era the way they did, and then obviously making the bet on Gen AI with OpenAI and NVIDIA and everything, just it's a wonderful. And Satya is calling a $6.5 trillion opportunity, TAM, within generative AI with the partners included in that. And if you refer back to this podcast,
it's 0.2 trillion?
6.5 trillion.
6.5 trillion.
OpenAI is talking about a $7 trillion build out. But both those numbers are bigger than the 5.4 trillion that I mentioned.
Yes.
That businesses and governments spend today in tech and telco.
Spend.
It's actually going to double the size of our industry with all new opportunity. And partners can earn a multiple of that as we go forward.
What are the predictions?
So I made the distributor prediction that, I wrote a piece back in the day before COVID that, distributors are distributors, the future of distribution. And there's 500 distributors around the world, big in Europe, big in Asia Pacific. We have 10 large ones here in North America. But, the conclusion of going through all the 10 trends back then, all the subscription economy, marketplace is growing. If you put all 10 together...
Do you need them as an intermediary?
It looked tough. And the conclusion was only two things. To come out of hiding, you have to join the 7 trusted. There's no white labeling to this new buyer.
That's right.
And then number 2, you got to build a platform for distribution. We know now that the cost of that starts with a B. So TD SYNNEX put $1 billion into Stream 1. Ingram has spent over $1 billion building out the acquisitions of all the companies that became Cloud Blue. And we know now that was Odin, that was Parallels back in the day. We know now, Pax8 spending $1 billion to build this thing out with a lot of, growth and strength. But when you start counting out the 500 distributors, you maybe count on 2 hands, if you're lucky, who could come up with $1 billion of free cash flow for R&D. And you have to keep up with this too. It's not a one-time build. So you have to have something competitive with AWS and Microsoft, which have blank checks. And so in an industry that is 73% to, through, and with partners, procurement doesn't change that fast. Sometimes it takes decades, especially in the government. But in big business, it may take a decade to switch that 73%. But marketplaces are also an indirect sale. And how, all this builds out, we're still going to end 10 years from now with half of our industry being resold.
Yeah.
Hardware, runs everything. For everybody who said software is going to eat the world, for $1 trillion in software, there's still $1 trillion in hardware.
Absolutely.
And whether you think about IoT, AI, automation, blockchain, quantum computing, self-driving cars, drones, metaverse, 3D printers, whatever hype cycle, emerging tech you want to talk about, 1 million companies, it's all hardware. So keep in mind that there's going to be a lot of atoms floating around along with bits.
Yep.
And distributors are the ones that connect those dots. And there is a future, but there's not going to be 500 of them.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be niche players and consolidation and those who can afford investments to start with Bs in a market that's valued at 10 cents to the dollar.
Yep.
There's just an economic reality here starting this year for most.
It's an exciting time.
almost on every facet of our industry, there's a changing story. The people, the processes, programs, the technology, and just trying to figure out all these trends at once and which 48% of companies are going to get it.
So for all of our viewers and our listeners, as we're kicking off this 2025, what advice would you have for them on optimizing for success?
Well, I would start with yourself. We talked about career kind of halfway through.
Yep.
All of these tectonic shifts, all of these inflection points take learning. I want to engage with my peers. I want to engage in, great environments like this, communities like this one.
Yep.
Places where, whether I read, whether I listen, whether I attend, but I want to dial in a bit, because what got me here is not going to get me there.
That's right.
What got my company here is not going to get them there. And there's critical points that you don't want to be 5 years behind, some of these trends.
That's right.
You're going to find yourself kind of on the outside. And whether you have, 10 years left in your career, a couple of years left in your career, or you're beginning your career, I kind of want to ride this wave on the front side of it, to use a Southern Florida term. And
you don't want to get toppled.
I would be in skill building. I would be in skill building mode.
Yeah.
If Cisco did this 30 days ago, go rip that apart. I'd want to listen. I'd want to read. I'd want to get somebody to dissect, what they did. How close is that to the Microsoft one, to VMware, to HP? 35,000 vendors in our industry that have channel programs. Who's next? How do you, you design for the future while supporting the past?
Yes.
Cisco still has 44% of their business, and that's a lot of switches and routers that need to be sold, need to be spiffed. So that's somewhat bifurcated. And, I don't want to just have my career hanging on that side, but I probably want to run the whole thing and make sure that all pieces are running, like a well-oiled engine. So I think it all comes to, inside, and keep your ears, firmly to the ground, and keep your peer networks. And you're always the product of the 5 people around you. Probably a good time to kind of look at your mentors and look at the 5, people you trust the most, and make sure that they're, speaking about this future and have their eyes out, 18 months or more.
Well, unselfish plug here. Come to our events, watch our podcasts, listen to our podcasts, hear from leaders like Jay, some of the executives from the hyperscalers who come and speak at our events, talking about where they see the future and where they're investing. And then come to our events, because you'll also get to network with other incredible leaders, right? So great to have you here in the studio today. And then a plug that we're going to host an event here, February 20th. Might be somebody like Jay up on stage. We don't know yet for sure, but we think he might be joining us. But we'd love to have you all join us at our next Ultimate Partner event here in Boca Raton. Jay, thank you so much for joining us today. So great to have you back in the studio. The robe next time for sure.
All right. It's a commitment.
Well, and I don't want you to have to wear it on the scooter, on the motorcycle running back to back to Boynton Beach. But so great to have you back in the studio. Great to have your support, friendship, and always great to have you as a guest on Ultimate Guide to Partnering, Jay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for watching and listening to the Ultimate Guide to Partnering. We've been on an amazing journey with Ultimate Partner and the Ultimate Guide to Partnering. It's been almost 8 years now since we started this podcast, and over 4 years since we launched Ultimate Partner. Last year, we hosted 2 live events, and this coming year, we hope to host 4 live in-person events, where we'll bring leaders like Jay McBain into the room to help you achieve your greatest results. We'd love you to be part of this journey, and there are several ways you can do so. You can continue to watch and listen to our podcast. Please subscribe on your favorite channels or YouTube, and you can also rank and review our episodes, which also helps us attract more listeners and viewers to Ultimate Guide to Partnering. You can also follow along with our newsletter. You can go to theultimatepartner.com to subscribe to our free newsletter, or on LinkedIn, you could also follow us as well. And please come and join us and be part of our community. The Ultimate Partner Experience is a thriving community where leaders like you come to achieve their greatest results. If you go to theultimatepartner.com/experience, you can learn more about our community. and we'd love to have you join us at our events this year, one of which will be here in our Boca studio. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for following. I want to thank you for watching, and I want to thank you for your support of the Ultimate Guide to Partnering.